Herzlich willkommen. Mikrofone sind, ja genau. Herzlich willkommen zum Internationalen Literaturfestival 2022. Wir sprechen heute über investigativen Journalismus. Ich mache auf Englisch weiter. Our topic today is investigative journalism and how that works or how people make it work. If you were expecting Georg Maskolo today, he at short notice wasn't able to come, but we invited a great other colleague, which I'm going to introduce very soon. But I'll start with Maxim. He's the editor of Bellingcat. I can tell you something about the name. It comes from a fairy tale about mice who were very afraid of a cat, and of the cat being able to sneak at them quietly. So they were making up the plan that it would be very useful to have a bell around the cat's neck so that they cannot be surprised anymore. But then there was the next question: who is going to be able to bell the cat? And that's how that didn't happen. And Bellingcat is quite the opposite. Is the evidence that it is possible to put bells around dangerous cats, right, Maxim?
Yeah, that's right.
Could you introduce Bellingcat? How would you describe your organization?
Well, I'd say that we sit somewhere kind of between traditional journalism and investigative research. I mean, the story started in 2014, thank you, June, July 2014, with the shoot down of the MH17 flight, the Malaysian airliner over eastern Ukraine. And the sheer amount of open source evidence from the front lines that were appearing online attracted a large number of open source researchers, many of them amateurs. And Elliot Higgins, my colleague, recently wrote a book called We Are Bellingcat, which details the entire history, so I won't lay out all of it. But it essentially started as a group of amateurs who would then work with professional journalists to help identify the culprits of that crime, which they eventually did. And several years on, we now have around 35 full-time staff members, and we've grown to work. I would say we don't just work with journalists. We also have a remit which is to kind of promote an understanding and use of open source investigative techniques. And we've seen that recently with the war in Ukraine, that many traditional news organizations are starting to build and incorporate open source investigative news desks into their work, using a lot of the techniques that we do. So we often run trainings, for example, for journalists about how to use open source tools, how to verify information from social media, how to collate leaked data, how to scrape a Telegram channel, and all this is becoming, I'd say, like a really important part of any journalist investigative toolkit.
Would you put big data in this realm of open source as well?
It's kind of a common question that we get is, what's the distinction between open source journalism and data journalism? And I think about this a lot as an editor, having worked for more traditional journalistic publications. And I think the difference is probably that data journalism is quantitative, right? And open source is more qualitative. So, for example, we do some work where we would, for example, download the entirety of a far-right figure's Telegram channel, for example, and figure out, who they're talking to, who's liking them, how this has grown within certain communities over a certain amount of time. But that's not always representative of what we do. I mean, sometimes an entire investigation can be based on one piece of visual forensic evidence, particularly it's the case in Ukraine with war crimes, which we look into quite a lot. So I wouldn't define ourselves as data journalists, but the overlap in that Venn diagram is very, very big.
Thank you, Maxim. And now I would like to introduce Tatev Hovhannisyan, and she is with us in Yerevan in Armenia. How are you doing?
Thanks, good. Delighted to be here, and thanks for the invitation.
I would like you to introduce openDemocracy, which is the organization that you are working for. Tatev is an award-winning feminist investigative journalist, and she has a particular interest in universal human rights, but even more special into feminist issues and topics. And she's working at a certain program or topic at openDemocracy, which is called Tracking the Backlash. So would you please first introduce openDemocracy and how you work, how you provide the circumstances for investigative journalism, and then probably tracking the backlash? Is there a way?
Yes, sure. So as we know, openDemocracy is independent media organization based in London. Tracking the Backlash is one of the projects of openDemocracy. Tracking the Backlash started in 2017. And what we are doing, we are a team of feminist investigative journalists, as we call ourselves, and we are tracking the backlash against universal human rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, and we are doing this globally. We have team everywhere, like in Latin America, in Africa, and in Europe and Eurasia, and I'm coordinating the work in Europe and Eurasia. So what we are doing big investigations, and that would be data-driven. There will be like undercover element, trying to have some real-world impact with our investigations, because what investigative journalists are supposed to do, we should challenge power, expose abuse, we should tell the stories that powerful don't want to be heard, and we should do this in public interest. But unfortunately, sometimes women's rights are not on investigative journalists' agendas, because I think one of the reasons that women and LGBT people and people of color are excluded from editorial teams. That's why we are not talking about these problems. And excluding of these people from editorial teams means directly leads to exclusion of these people's rights from media agendas. That's why we're kind of innovative project, and we're trying to talk about these problems that no one did. I can brag that no one did before us. And we're doing many cross-border investigations, ambitious projects that sometimes lead to real-world impact. That maybe I'll have a chance to talk about the investigations later, but this is shortly about the program.
What I would like from you, before we turn to examples of your work and certain stories, I would like to know what motivates you to work investigative, because to me that is the hardest form and the most uncomfortable form of journalism. Would you start, Tatev?
Yes, it's like, yeah, you are quite right. It's quite challenging, but at the same time, it's very exciting work. I think the main motivation for me is that this kind of journalism leads to real-world impact, as I said, that you can see results that you will not be able to see with regular reporting sometimes. That's what's motivating me. And when you see the first results of your work, you are starting to be more motivated and excited to work on further investigations. It's a powerful way to also help people to talk about the problems that are coming from we are following the money that it's directly affecting ordinary people's life. And when you see some changes in policy, like changing policy making or any other kind of fundings that harm people, so it's really rewarding process. That's why I maybe like it, and it's also about women's rights and being a woman. And helping women and other people whose voices has been excluded from other media agendas. It's really appealing and nice process.
We're going to talk about and uncomfortable is not even the right word, because it's straight dangerous sometimes. We're going to talk about this in the course of this talk. But Maxim, what is motivating you? And for you it's a little bit different, because you work with open source, which might in a way seem like the second row, but really isn't, right?
Right. I mean, personally, I share with my colleagues the fact that I'm much too curious for my own good. like everyone at Bellingcat is, and Tatev and all investigative journalists worldwide are. I mean, I'm not by background an open source researcher. I was a traditional journalist and an editor, and I was working for publications that tended to focus on the former Soviet Union, but not only. I mean, I joined Bellingcat at a time when Bellingcat was trying to build in traditional journalistic practices into itself and publishing investigations increasingly to, in a more journalistic format. What motivated me, and I think what motivated others at Bellingcat, was mostly, I think, curiosity. I mean, many of us are not journalists, but we do journalism, right? I mean, we have people that come from all walks of life. I mean, data geeks, former coders, former programmers. People that are geeks about one part of a region, like myself, that used to be a journalist. And I think looking at journalism these days, it's very, very easy to be very cynical about what journalism is, with the growth in disinformation and the fact that the monetizing issue, nobody has ever fully squared that circle in the long term. But all of us, I think, very kind of idealistic about what we think journalism can be. And I think investigative journalism is really like the intersection of that. It's inherently idealistic. And one of the most difficult things that you get when you publish a piece of investigative journalism, when you see on social media, well, you reveal this and you reveal that, and nothing ever changes. The Panama Papers, we just see like how many people, were hiding money, and the state did nothing. And I don't know what to respond to that, because that's a question for the state. I mean, I can't answer for the state. In some ways, it feels that when you reveal something, the scale of things that governments are not doing right, it's just made even more obvious to people. But that's also a really great motivator,
Yeah, I mean, we can just start with this, if you like, because you published a story in the Spiegel 2 weeks ago, and it goes in depth into the Russian spy system. You traced people, you traced how they work, you traced how they recruit, you traced entire networks. So far, what has come out of that?
You mean specifically the story in Der Spiegel recently, or in general?
No, just recently, just the 2 weeks ago.
Well, should I recap the story if people haven't read it?
Yes, please.
Okay, so basically, there was a woman in Naples who owned a jewelry line and liked to pose with her cat a lot on social media, and also liked to pose with members of NATO's Joint Command staff in Naples for several years. Apparently had quite a lot of romantic relationships with them too. Turned out to be a GRU spy, member of Russia's foreign intelligence service, undercover. And that was the results of many Bellingcat investigations kind of, coming together. I mean, we pull the thread of something, and then, things. There's not really an end of a Bellingcat investigation because they're so data-driven. So the clue, might have to give all credit to my colleague Christo and Elliot and Arik and others who were working on this investigation, started in the course of having realized in other investigations that members of the Russian security services, at least the GRU, apparently seemed to use passports with consecutive numbers. Big operational security. I mean, people are human failings. This appears to be something that has helped investigative journalists in the past. So we ended up sending, Christo and my colleagues ended up sending to a group of Belarusian hacktivists who had access to a passport database from the Belarusian state, information about this kind of range of passports, and several people came up.
And probably we have to say this is information that was open source, but you had to buy it, right?
Yeah. Not in that case. I mean, that was information that hacktivists had found. But generally, like the previous investigations, we use a method called probiv, which means look up in Russian. And this is something which I think has driven a lot of the revelations which we've done about Navalny's poisoners, about Buikov's poisoners, about all of the movements of spies, the Russian spies in particular. And it is, in a very centralized state like Russia, the government is very eager to concentrate large amounts of data about its citizens in databases. And it's also a very corrupt state. So for a long time, people in Russia have been using this system, often data brokers on the black market, Telegram bots, this kind of thing, to find out information about each other. Employers might do it when they're doing a background check. And this isn't something that we invented either. I mean, BBC Russian, in several years before we revealed the Navalny's poisoners, was 2017, 2016, I think. They had also done investigation using this. I think it was the Financial Times in 2016, but don't quote me on that. Another Broad Street paper with a bureau in Moscow, which found databases of the Russian driver licenses just for sale in CDs in Moscow. So this data is open source, but it kind of stretches the definition of open source to a slightly more elastic degree. So it is available for anybody if you want to get it, but not the average person would get it. That data allowed us to...
How much do you have to pay?
We're talking...
Probably that's the question.
It's hundreds rather than thousands, and
okay.
This is my colleagues. I mean, I'm an editor,
okay.
But yeah.
But back to what you revealed now. You have what you found from the Belarusian passport data was free to you. So
that was free to use. Potted summary of the story. Basically, a name comes up, one of several. It's a long Latin name, Latina lady who stuck out among the people that came up. In Googling her name, my colleague Christo discovered a Peruvian document stating that someone of that name had tried to get a Peruvian passport under false pretenses. That already rang a lot of alarm bells. My colleagues then started looking at social media affiliated with this lady and discovered that she was, kind of a socialite, like the kind of, really the big C, really someone at the center of parties in Naples with a lot of NATO officers and people. She also ran a jewelry line, which a photographer linked to the NATO base that apparently helped take photos of, to help promote her business. We then found these photos, tried to look in a completely open source, free reverse image search. That found a lady with a Russian social media profile called Olga Kolobova. The match was very small, it was about 20%, I think. However, she had a very, very active Facebook presence, which interestingly coincided with the absence of the faux Peruvian lady from Naples.
Yeah.
So whenever Adela wasn't in Naples, Olga was posting a lot on social media. Something's starting to kind of shape up here. So with this gap in the digital footprint allowed us to focus in on other databases to which we'd previously had access. And we discovered that this particular Olga Kolobova, her address happened to be the same address of a former high-ranking Russian military official. You see, so it snowballs and it snowballs and it snowballs. We were then able to get a fresh photo of Olga Kolobova from a whistleblower who had access to driver's license databases in Russia. That match then, because it was a more recent photo, came up much higher than the initial photograph. The tax, I think it was the driver's license database, then allowed us to find her number. We put the number into WhatsApp, and the photograph that comes up on Olga's WhatsApp is not only a photo of the same lady, but precisely the same photograph as Adela's profile picture on Facebook. So,
talking about human mistakes, right?
Yeah, exactly. This does happen. It's happened before. I mean, one example that Christo has pointed out in previous public presentations is, the coup attempt in Montenegro. One of the GRU officers who had sent money to one of their local, one of their local contacts used the address on Horoshevskoye Chaussee in Moscow for a Western Union transfer as the sender. That address is the headquarters of the GRU. People make mistakes. I mean, and this isn't just about Russian intelligence agents as well. It isn't about we don't only publish on Russian intelligence agents. We publish on all kinds of things. Another example I can leave you with is a story which we did before I joined a couple of years ago, in which US soldiers on NATO bases had been using a running app, unbeknownst to them, which was publicly available, and there was also a leak. So it then showed serving military officers and their running tracks around NATO bases. A year or so ago, they also had been using flashcards, flashcard app. As you remember studying foreign languages, this is like a digital version of those. For the security protocols of nuclear weapons stored in Europe. Nobody's perfect, but my God.
I was asking to tell Adela or Olga's story because we wanted to know what happened. What was the impact that this story has? Do we know where Adela is right now?
Well, I mean, Christo found in travel databases that she'd flown back to Russia and doesn't appear to have been any activity, as far as I know, since she returned there. It does mean that, as much as we can say that people make stupid mistakes, I mean, it's quite an audacious operation, isn't it, to put someone in a place like that and then remain undetected for several years. I mean, I would imagine that, the Italian government, the US have all kinds of inquiries, but it probably means that Adela won't be able to continue. Actually, Christo was able to find that a new flat was registered in Kolobova's name, some quite fancy real estate in the center of Moscow. And I think she's working for the Russian pension fund or other state organizations. So, I mean, I think the picture that's shaping up is she got caught out, and as thanks for her service to the fatherland or whatever, she got given a nice flat in Moscow. But I think that's what we'd expect.
And Tatev, we're going to get back to you with one of your recent story in a minute. I just want to ask this because what this story in the Spiegel reveals. At least such an amount is how kind of naive and unprotected also kind of German and how blind they were to Russian spy activities here. And do you know? Did you track reactions directly to this story and the revelations that you have there?
To this story in Germany?
Yeah.
No, we didn't. I mean, I know the Spiegel did a very, very big write-up, which also, took into account all the other spy scandals in Europe. I mean, from the Skripals to the murder of Zelmakhan Khangoshvili, the Chechen asylum seeker in the Tiergarten a few years ago. But no, I don't know myself specifically what the institutional
because
reaction is.
that is astonishing how it is like a pants-down revelation also for German authorities, and it seems to just appear and then go away again. But let's turn to Tatev. You have been revealing something about anti-abortion or abortion, kind of a progesterone, a hormone that doctors, that anti-abortionists in the US provide for women who are taking abortion pills. Could you please first explain the medical theory behind that, and then what you found out?
Yeah, sure. And Maxim, great story. I really admire Bellingcat's work always, our colleagues. So about abortion pill reversal, so you might not have heard about the process. So it's driven by Heartbeat International, which is a US Christian rights organization, a fundamental organization that we revealed in our previous investigations how they are spending a lot of money worldwide pushing their narratives, anti-human, anti-abortion, etc. So it means if you are taking the first, abortion consists of two pills, and if you take the first pill and then you somehow having second thoughts, you are calling doctors and they are saying, oh, you can reverse the process by taking high doses of progesterone, which is a hormone which might be okay, but there is no scientific explanation to it and evidence of it. So there was just one research of it, and it just abruptly halted in 2019, if I'm not mistaken, because women have been hemorrhaging and taken into hospital. So there is no research, so they are just prescribing this progesterone via phone or via email. So no checkup, no responsibility for giving women this high dosage of progesterone. So we tried to find out how this scheme works, and our reporters on 4 continents in different countries, up to 30 countries, went undercover, posed themselves as women who are having second thoughts after taking the first pill of abortion, and contacted their doctors, and like Heartbeat International's hotline based in the US. And from the US, they directed these calls around the world. So if I'm based in Armenia, they connected me to a doctor based in Armenia who just via email told me, oh, you should take progesterone. But I'm saying if I am hemorrhaging or anything is happening to me, just it's very natural hormone, just take it. And it wasn't like even OB-GYN, it was like another profession, so just a doctor. So they have this a widespread network of doctors in different countries that are prescribing this unproven treatment to women. So we published the investigation on these like 4 continents, how they are doing this. And also I was very surprised and startled when we found out that this also thing in Europe, because we know Europe is the like safest place to be a woman, and our rights are like protected on high level. But it turns out that in dozens of European countries, this also happens. So doctors are not asking you to come and to have like checking and like medical checkup or anything. They're just prescribing this so-called treatment. So as an impact, we had like calls from policymakers, European parliamentarians, a lot of doctors, experts called for action and said that women are being used as medical guinea pigs for their purposes. Also, our doctor that we revealed in our investigation based in the UK, so the doctor, as a result of our investigation, was prevented of doing unsupervised medical work. And there was trial going like a long time, but then later she was back to her work. Anyways, this kind of like actions could just be have preventive actions and raising awareness about like these kind of things. And also there are like if you just follow up what you are doing and then going back to this doctor, etc., I think it's a powerful way to have a real world impact. If you have any questions, I hope it's understandable, or if you have any questions, Vivian.
No, I mean, what is also astonishing is that a US activist, anti-abortionist activist group is building networks to doctors in Europe, where you call a hotline and suddenly you have some doctor in, I think the only country that didn't work was Serbia, but in other European countries where you had your undercover reporters, there were doctors who were taking kind of these directions and then following the process that this anti-abortionist group set up. And that is also astonishing. Do you know how they build these networks and how this is established?
So there are many ways of doing this, because they are using many tactics for their taking roots in these countries. Don't know exactly like how they are finding these people. It's another topic of investigation. But what they are doing, they have a lot of money. They have determination to go beyond the US, to go other parts of the world. And they are not going to stop, as we see based on our investigations. So they are using interventions in court cases sometimes, using amicus briefs, intervening in European courts, and protecting like anti-abortion cases, fooling campaigns in Europe. They are setting up offices in Brussels. So there are many ways how they can work.
Yeah.
The other question is why they are so like influential in Europe. Why European like regulators under their nose this is happening. So this is a question that Europe should ask themselves. Maybe asking for more like financial transparency from the organizations that are setting up offices in Europe, and also like trying to have some influence affecting people's like ordinary people's life.
Yes.
I think yes, the answer is in the EU, because we had I had an appearance in European Parliament based on this investigation, and they were asking like what we can do, what is next. So it's not our job, like journalist job, to tell like European Parliament what to do. We are just trying to find the information. We are giving the evidence, and it's up to regulators to take some actions. But it's very obvious that they're not going to stop. And this is just one small example of how this network works, because behind of it, a lot of dark money, hundreds of millions. This is part of our another investigation, how we found out this. And the like investigations show that money flowing from the US, especially to Europe, is going up and up. So it's not going to stop. And like in recent years, it's doubled, and it's very disturbing, I think.
But the difference in your work is that you work with undercover people. So you had women calling these hotlines, you had women going to doctors. What I would like to know, what are the ethical grounds that you work on? How far does this undercover go? Where are your boundaries? And for example, how much is it okay to conceive the people that you're investigating, and where does that end?
Yeah, thank you for the question. It's very interesting one. So undercover like mechanism is very controversial in journalism. So not every newsroom is using it, because it has its like legal issues and ethical issues. So what we are doing, openDemocracy, is working with the lawyer. We have our lawyer, and with every big investigations we are consulting with the lawyer beforehand. Then we are going to undercover. So undercover reporting is being done only in the cases that there is no other way to prove what we're going to reveal with other regular reporting. So we are consulting with our lawyer. There is a long process. We are filing specific forms, like why we need to do this, how far we can go, how is it falling into like serving to public, what is the purpose, what's the like public interest. So after reviewing by the doctor by the lawyer this protocol, then we are training, briefing journalists, and it's a real long process, like starting from security issues, how they should use VPN if they are doing online. If it's physical, they're working with coaches, mental health supporters, etc. So because it's not like every person can do this. There are times that just journalists are calling and saying, oh, you know, I can't do this because I don't feel myself. So we are just like in touch with them every minute, like via some very secure apps. So they have their bodies like in the process, so they will not feel alone. And the lawyer is saying how far they can go. They can go, in this case, like in abortion pill reversal, they can go as far as they are not going to take the hormone. But there is also another thing, that the lawyer is not allowing us to publish the doctor's name. So there is this ethical part. And in every country, there are different like laws, legislation. So it's very hard. But if you are going to publish the investigation on openDemocracy's website, which means UK laws are applying to you, and the UK defamation law is very strict, as we know. So we are trying to be very, very cautious. And before going undercover, we're also trying to see what's the legislation in other countries, so to not break the law. It's as I said, it's very controversial. It's very both exciting, but also very dangerous sometimes, or because we have people like in Africa and Latin America who did undercover work and about conversion therapy. They post themselves as LGBT people who want to change their, or was parents sent them to therapies to change their sexual identity or gender identity. And it's sometimes very hard. After that, they are having they need some time to decompress, and because the investigations last very long, they might take a few months, and they need continuous support of editorial team.
What I would also like to know is when we're talking about the impact that the story can have, the one thing is how institutions like the European Parliament or national administration follows up with what you found out. The other thing is how some kind of public is reacting, and the way the public is reacting is, of course, depending on how much information is floating around at them anyway, and how much lies and propaganda is they are exposed to. For example, Steve Bannon, the Breitbart News founder and advisor to Trump, he was talking about, and there's been statements from Russian authorities also that this is one thing is to kind of prevent the truth from coming out. Another strategy is, as Bannon said, to flood the zone with shit, to have so much information and conspiracy theories floating around that people are so kind of irritated that they don't feel able to judge whether one story might be true or not. And I mean, you were in that, you sometimes find things out, like the cat lady seems like a crazy story. It seems like something that somebody could have made up. How do you deal with these things, and how do you push your stories to the public so that they kind of are able to take them as truth, that you trust? How do you gain the public's trust? Yes.
No, I think it's the eternal question really for journalists at the moment. I mean, we like to think, and we do think, that the niche that we occupy in the media environment with open source means that we have to quite rigorously show every step of the way how we reached our conclusions, and ideally present all of the data upon which we reach those conclusions, which is why many of our articles are significantly longer than your standard journalistic piece, and are generally we have media partners who are more traditionally newsy, who then write them up and then link to us. But I think, there was an interesting Reuters study, I think last April, that found that, kind of contrary to what a lot of journalists think, the simply insisting on the fact that we follow good ethical norms and journalistic norms goes some of the way to gaining trust with audiences, but doesn't go all of the way. And many people still rely on kind of brand identity to create trust, or what others say about you. I think with where Bellingcat stands in that discussion about trust, the participatory role that we allow our audience hopefully allows people to demystify some of what goes on, in the wheelhouse, so behind, on the backstage. The Navalny investigation was an example of that. I mean, we, the guys who mysteriously, coincidentally followed Navalny on all of the trips, for about two years. we knew that that only constituted about 4% of all of their possible travel. So then we put all of their other travel in Russia into a database and shared it with our audience. And we got hundreds and hundreds of suggestions about, look into this, that overlaps with this time when this opposition figure was poisoned, that overlaps with this. Many of them were wrong, but 4 of them were right. And that's how we ended up looking into the poisoning of Dmitry Bykov, the Russian poet, and of Vladimir Karamurza, the Russian opposition figure. How to get people to trust media today is, it's an open-ended question. And I think that open source has started to become like an important flag bearer in that. But I think of the citizen journalism revolution of the early 2000s, right? When people were often encouraged to, people can become journalists themselves, they can write. And I have a lot of sympathy for that. I've worked at citizen journalism outlets myself, but it's also important to acknowledge the the power differentials between journalists and a lot of ordinary people who don't have the resources to take on the risk, some of this stuff you can't do in a day job. You can't do it. You have to build trust with your sources. So I think like this model of participatory journalism is something where I think a lot of newsrooms could become, could help demystify what they do. For me personally, one of my the first wow moments with this kind of emerging form of data journalism was the killing of Jimmy Mubenga, who was an Angolan asylum seeker who was deported from the UK. I think it was in 2010, 2011, and one of the companies which the UK government had outsourced the kind of policing to G4S, basically they put him in a kind of crunch position when the plane took off, which meant that he couldn't breathe, and then he died on the flight. And Paul Lewis, who's now one of the Guardian's investigations head, basically used Twitter back then, social media back then, to say, were you on this flight? Where were you sitting? Send me your ticket. So then he was able to kind of like draw a map of where everyone was sitting on the plane, and then kind of like build an outline of who was sitting where and what they could have heard. And that's something which organizations like Forensic Architecture here in Berlin are continuing to do. So I don't know if that answers your question, but I think maybe it's idealistic, but I like to think that kind of opening up the door to a newsroom can maybe get people to trust us a bit more.
Yeah. Tatev, how do you go about it? Because with you doing undercover, it's probably a bit more difficult to open up to the public. But how do you try to stand out? Firstly, get people's attention in a room that is flooded with shit, and secondly, to gain their trust.
Yeah, it's very hard question. So what we do, yes, we do undercover work, but in our day-to-day work, we build trust between civil society and journalism. We work with them very closely, because in our work we need we need to work with them because they know things that our ears on the ground. Civil society knows things long before we know, especially in human rights sphere. So sometimes they are giving just us hints, and we have resources to go deeper and do investigations. So we are building this trust. As Maxim said, it's all about brand, and if you are on the stage that you have the brand, people are approaching you also, civil society, people, ordinary people, other media. What we do, we work with civil society and we work with other big publications. So sometimes we are publishing things with The Guardian or other big names. It has its pros and cons, co-partnering with big names, but it's making your work more influential. Also, we work if we're publishing things in other European countries or other countries apart from the UK, so we are trying to find a media partner there. So some media outlet who has a niche in the country, and we did with Lithuanian public television, LRT, last year. So it's a bit hard process to work with a publication with another country because they have their legislation, their lawyer, and it's taking for a while to set up dates and everything, but it's really more influential. And if you're publishing things, and in Lithuania you can publish on LRT's website, and in English on openDemocracy's website, and it's like a co-publishing work, like collaboration between two media outlets. It's giving you more credibility. I think it's like
that is one thing, excuse me, that is interesting as well. You are both networks that are funded by grants or by a fund, in Bellingcat's case, and you partner with big media names. But the striking thing is that not even in Germany. I mean, the Recherchenetzwerk that Georg Maskolo is working at is also the public broadcasting stations are only one part of it, and you have the private newspapers. And in your case, you're not even kind of based and financed from classical journalism outlets. What does this tell us about the state of the classical journalism?
Is that to me or to Tatev?
Yeah, whoever has an idea. Who goes first?
Do you want to go, Tatev?
You go, Maxim.
Okay. No, well, I think being a niche in terms of your speciality in the craft, rather than the audience that you seek to respond to, is maybe the ideal for how investigative journalism is developing now. And by that I mean, think of when you go to the cinema and a film finishes and you see all of the credits. I think investigative journalism needs to become like that. Like we need to have less ego in terms of who we collaborate with, particularly at a time when media is, so kind of shortly funded and marginalized. Yeah. Being at a journalistic network, I think. So openDemocracy does this really, really well. Disclosure, I used to work there, but I'd say that if I hadn't, in the sense that, we need to start working with each other without this kind of hubris and as equals, I think, particularly with international investigations. There are a lot of fixers that do great work, but there's a big conversation in the industry now, particularly with risky stuff like investigative journalism. If you're a big newsroom in Western Europe, in countries where there's a lot of respect for journalistic, for comparatively respect for journalistic freedoms, then, and then you employ a freelance fixer in a country, in a country in the global south where that's not the case, then, there are some ethical questions there. And I hope that investigative journalism will evolve that way as well, so that we share the cost and we share the burden and we benefit from each other's skills.
Mm-hmm. Tatev?
I totally agree with what Maxim said. Really, we need to work with each other more. What I'm doing in my day-to-day work, I'm trying to build this network using international different platforms, festivals, etc. You are meeting people, you are just starting to create the seeds, and then it's becoming a big collaboration. Because otherwise you are just sitting, everyone in especially after COVID, just there are less, fewer chances to meet each other, and you are just sitting in your room and doing investigations, and you can't succeed just by your own. So you need connections, you need these human interactions, you need media contacts. So, and not only in publications, though classical journalism is a bit different, what we do at openDemocracy, but I think civil society also matters a lot, collaboration with civil society. And we need to be more maybe open to this kind of collaborations, sharing also the burden and the sharing. It's not easy. As I said, I have experience working with different media outlets in different countries, and it's sometimes very hard, and you are saying, oh, next time I'm doing it by myself. But when you see the results, and it's really rewarding, and you are thinking, oh, it's more influential, it's more impactful than doing just by ourselves. So I think we should just work with each other more.
Speaking about collaborations, the last questions I would like to ask, and that is probably something that you get accused of a lot, is how do you who do you choose who to work with? Because I could imagine working all over the world in different countries that organizations like Geheimdienste, secret services are trying to get in contact, are trying to instrumentalize you, but also sometimes even companies. Given the fact that you are that open to information and to informants and topics, how do you prevent from being instrumentalized or misleaded? And really bluntly, do you work with informations from secret services?
No, we don't. And I think that the issue of information that we find which is open source but is not necessarily widely known as being such because it doesn't come from social media is possibly a large reason for that misconception. I think when the Navalny investigation was published, we tried quite hard to be very open about this, the probiv data, the lookup system, which we've used with Telegram bots and so forth and data brokers to find this kind of work. But whenever we download that data, we also cross-reference it with other data which is in the public. So, and that takes a hell of a long time, you know. So if we have a travel database, for example, and and someone sends it to us from, I don't know, a Proton Mail account, we're not just going to publish something based on that. We're going to then find, other versions of the same database, cross-reference it, see if anything has been changed. And that means that our investigations can be, very, very long. I mean, the one about, the spy in Naples took 11 months. We also, I think that one of the differences with open source is that open source is by its nature very, very fragile in the sense that we share our techniques and our methods, and then everyone can learn from them. Our competitors, if we want to call them that, other media organizations can then learn them as well, and that's what we do. I think with open source in particular. We didn't invent it. I mean, a lot of organizations have been doing open source before us. I mean, it's been something that, mineral prospectors, for example, are often buying satellite imagery to find out, what areas might be particularly lucrative for starting their operations and so forth.
But you would consider data leaks open source?
We would, if you can download them. If anyone can download them, then we would consider them open source, yeah. But of course, we then try and vet those leaks and figure out where they're coming from. And I think a big difference from us compared to other traditional media organizations is we have worked with whistleblowers who've sent us information, but then the information they're sending us is generally about something that we're investigating that has a big open source component. So, what's baked into our method is that the meat of the story, too many cooking metaphors there, but you know what I mean, the meat of the story has to be open source in the sense that we would not publish a story just based on a guy emailed us and told us this. And that's the nature of what we do. Sometimes with the ethical concerns of open source, it becomes difficult to do that. We have an entire monitoring project about the far right across Europe and North America. And, what do you do when you're telling people that, we found, a mainstream figure, I don't know, politician, maybe in the US, for the sake of argument, Canada, who's been following all of these like really vicious far-right Telegram channels. Now, journalistic best practice and everything we know about how to report on the far right says that you don't just, screenshot and share what all these people write, their hate manifestos, because that's the oxygen of amplification. So you shouldn't do that. But then that means that if we have to blur those on the website according to journalistic best practice, then sometimes our readers are taking at face value from us that those posts ever existed. So, there is always, even with open source, there's going to be an element of trust. But I like to think that the fact that we're saying we found this on a social media website and so could you. You could go onto the Wayback Archive, the Internet Archive, and find that these existed. You go to Tweet Tunnel and find that the deleted tweets existed. Yeah, it's. I don't know if that answers your question as well. It's a lot of.
Yeah, it does. I mean, in a way, what you are revealing in your answers is always that being transparent and being able to be followed up from your audience is a key in many things, in gaining that trust, in kind of also probably preventing from being instrumentalized. I would like to open the discussion now because we still have 6 minutes left. If there are any questions from the audience that you would like to know about the work of Tatev and Maxim. We have a microphone that can come to you. Der Herr mit der Brille im blauen Hemd und dann der Herr mit dem blauen T-Shirt und der Brille. Und wenn Sie die falschen Klamotten anhaben, Pech.
Thank you for introducing your work. My question is about the philosophy of Bellingcat in terms of handling data or disclosing sensitive information. How is your work different from the way WikiLeaks discloses data? Think of the campaign in the US 2016 when Trump won because one of the reasons was that there were data disclosed from the Democratic Party and yes.
About Hillary Clinton's emails,
yes.
Which probably came from Russian sources, right?
Sure, no, that's very simple. And we don't publish the full databases. We publish excerpts from them. We wouldn't, simply say, here's a link to the information you can download. I mean, many of the things that WikiLeaks was able to reveal. I mean, I think it was the helicopter video in Iraq, of the collateral, so-called, the murder of innocent civilians there. I mean, I think very few people would say that wasn't in the public interest to reveal, but I think that we are also a journalistic organization as well as a research one. So we're regulated by the Dutch press code. Like we can't simply share everything that we find, but we hope that we're transparent about where that comes from and the ethical codes that we have, that our reasoning for why we can't always show what we do is consistent. And I like to think that it is. So I think that WikiLeaks maybe came from a time in journalism when the concern was that there was a lot of information that was hidden. Not to say that there still isn't. Of course, there's a lot of disclosures yet to be made on all kinds of things. And I feel that Bellingcat maybe reflects more of an emerging concern that there's just too much information out there and we have to know how to handle it and make sense of it. So, I think we're just very different in that sense.
Hier vorne der Herr mit der Brille und dann der Herr hinten. Genau. Ja.
Thank you very much. A really interesting conversation. I found Tatev's point at the beginning that your work, tracking the backlash, is partly aimed at challenging investigative journalism and open source organizations because they're, as you put it, perhaps I would characterize it bluntly, is that they're not feminist enough and they're not anti-racist enough. I'm interested, Maxim, what do you think about that from Bellingcat? I feel also challenged by that. I work for Human Rights Watch and we have a digital lab, which is a bit like Bellingcat, doing open source information, and it makes me reflect on whether we take a feminist perspective in our investigative work, doing open source investigations, or an anti-racist approach. I wonder, Maxim, what do you think about that? And also, Tatev, I'd like to know what you think, whether you think you're making progress with tracking the backlash in pushing organizations that do open source investigations, like Amnesty, like Human Rights Watch, like Bellingcat, in the right direction. Thank you.
Tatev, one first.
Yes, Tatev.
Thank you for the question. And yes, I'm thinking we're making progress, which is slow, but still is there. We are being approached by this organization sometimes, and we have been working sometimes together, passing embargoed information to each other. I don't think it has a large scale as of now, but we are doing our best. Just with our work, doing our work, because sometimes we need each other. Not only we need them, they need us too, because we have the resources to go deeper and do things that they can't do. So yes, I don't have any vivid examples of this collaboration recently, but there are some cases that we have been approached by them or by just their experts asking questions, or some with possibilities like of collaboration, like these kind of things are happening, but we still, like the project is 5 years old, so we have a way to go. Thank you.
No, I think, of course we could be better, who couldn't? The fact that Bellingcat is, largely the fruits of a group of volunteer researchers who then founded it, then probably reflects the kind of biases in terms of gender and society, class and so on, of the people that were involved in that kind of sphere at the time. And I think, one thing that we really want to do is to kind of increase availability of open source research to, particularly countries in the global south. And we have a tech fellow in India, a tech fellow in Zambia at the moment. And it's something that, one question that we often get is like, why do you focus so much on Russia? We actually do many, many other things, and one of the things that I'm passionate about is doing more stuff on Latin America and Africa at the moment. And that focus is maybe defined by the interests of the people that founded the organization, quite organically. But as we've grown, we now have 35 full-time staff. We probably have about 100 people who volunteer with us at in various stages for, archiving footage of possible war crimes in Ukraine. And we are really trying to be more diverse in how we hire and who we work, simply for the reason that it's also about objectivity. I think so much of the discussion that you see in really traditional newsrooms about journalistic objectivity is, oh yeah, let's get people of color or women, and they can put the what's the word, the subjective thing, and then we can continue doing the serious objective journalism. And I think it's just entirely facile and back to front. I mean, the more women you have in a newsroom, the more your sense of what's newsworthy just becomes more accurate because it's more representative. We tried piloting a few things with Africa, so we've done research on the Tigray conflict. We've certainly published quite a lot about that recently. 2 or 3 investigations. One of the biggest pieces that we did in the past year in terms of editorial work was an investigation about Cameroon in the Anglophone regions, the Anglophone crisis there. We did find that working in the global south and getting a more representative, representative numbers of contributors is difficult when you don't have a good media partner there. So I think we're a small organization and we have a lot to learn. Organizations like Tatev's, like 50/50, I think really, we have a lot to learn from them. So it's a work in progress.
Der Herr mit Brille und schwarzem T-Shirt.
All right. My question is about Bellingcat and how you cooperate with law enforcement authorities. For example, in the case like the spy case you were talking about. That's obviously also relevant for criminal prosecution and might be interesting for the secret services. So do you, for example, pass information to them before you publish them to avoid that the spy leaves the country or something like that?
We do a right of reply like any journalistic organization does, right? When we published a story about, the one I mentioned about the flashcard leaks, revealing stuff about nuclear weapons, like obviously, as a responsible news organization, you say, okay, like we're going to contact, the relevant governments and maybe give them 3 weeks, 4 weeks, whatever, to provide a response, because these are big, very bureaucratic organizations that require time to think of this stuff. But we don't kind of put the data in a box with a little bow and then send it by FedEx to them. That wouldn't happen. We're strictly journalistic in that sense. With the monitoring projects, it's a little bit different. With the Ukraine project at the moment, where we archive as much footage about what's going on the ground that could show possible war crimes or harm to civilians, we have basically firewalled off the section of the organization that works on that, and they completely dispassionately just archive what they find, put it in a format that could then be of use to criminal prosecutors in the future. I can say that there are about 11 such organizations that are interested in that data. But that, the people who work on that don't work on investigations about stuff that's happening in Ukraine at the moment. So there's a big wall between that and the newsroom. And that's where we're quite different from a journalistic organization, in the sense where that's a research part of the organization, and the newsroom is different. And we hope to kind of like codify that in a bit more detail in the coming years.
But when I understood this question right, it was also pointing towards when you see like Adela is working in Naples, do you contact Italian authorities to say, okay, we have a spy there that is possibly of danger, or probably you might be interested in capturing that spy before she escapes to Russia or something like that?
I mean, you'd have to speak to Christo, who kind of was the lead researcher on that project, but to my knowledge, we didn't. I think the right of reply would have given ample time for that kind of thing. It's also because by the time we publish something, that's also by the time when we've done all of the editorial and research checks and fact checks to ensure that the information is accurate. So, I think if something has gone through our editorial processes and goes on the website, then we know that information is accurate enough for, the public at large to base some kind of response on. If that answers your question.
So.
No, you can follow up.
But I'm not going to press you. Are there other questions? Yeah.
Maybe without the mic, just a quick one. Then authors, for instance, who investigate things come to you and ask you to help out on a specific question or topic.
I'm going to, because we have a streaming, can authors come to you and say, I have a story that I'm investigating in, could you help me with the open source team to follow that up?
Oh yeah, frequently. You mean authors like other journalists or researchers?
To be specific, they're a true crime author.
Okay.
It's a story in the oil industry, and I just thought that...
Oh, you mean like fiction as literature festival kind of author? Sorry, I thought of author like journalistic author.
No, that's what I mean.
Yeah.
So non-fiction. But my question is
He's
for the people as well. Mine is as well. Can I outsource something to Bellingcat?
You could try. I mein, you could send us an email. Yeah, no, I mean, it's more like, we get a lot of people reaching out to us, all kinds of people, who are doing like personal research projects, or they're interested about, they've found some videos they want verified, or they've found that, there may be a far right guy operating on some platform or whatever. No, I mean, we try to be as engaging with the public as we can. So no, I mean, you could certainly write to us, and not knowing specifically what kind of information you'd need or what kind of techniques you'd need, then I can't really answer.
There's not a general public revenue stream.
Yeah, no, I mean, we do part of our revenue streams. So a third is from bigger foundations, such as the Dutch Postcode Lottery. A third is from individual donors, and a third is from kind of open workshops where you can learn those kind of skills. So that's a really big part. The kind of publishing and the editorial side of Bellingcat is a certain part of the iceberg, and many of those workshops, we're increasing the number, and we hold them in all kinds of time zones. So that might be what you're looking for.
Perhaps one tactic might be to sneak into a workshop and have a foot in the door.
You do have to pay for some of them.
Yeah, maybe sometimes you have to invest in your own story. Are there other questions? Do you have answers? More answers.
More answers than questions.
No, just joking. Thank you very much.
Maybe Tatev has some thoughts on...
Tatev, do you have more answers? I'm just joking. Of course you do, but our time is up. So I would very much like to thank you and wish you all the best for your work, and thank you for your work. Same to you, Maxim.
Thank you.
And thank you for being here.
Thanks, Tatev.